For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.
You're a wonderful man in your satin
Condor Man, da-da-da-ba-ba-ba-ba. Hey, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues, where I talk about my favorite DC comics of the past that are still affordably available today, blabbing about why they are special to me and what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, this series does freely contain spoilers, but I think even spoiled, the stories I feature are still well worth reading. For more information about the intent of this series and what to expect from it, check out the video on the Christian Geek Central YouTube channel titled Essential Issues Series Introduction. Alright, we've covered some key origin stories and events from DC Comics, and now we're looking at an event in The Flash that was a major shock to fans, the return of Barry Allen. This was originally told in issues 74 through 79 of the early 1990s Flash series that focused on Wally West, who originally was Kid Flash. You had Barry Allen, well, first you had Jay Garrick, of course, in the silver hat from the 1940s. And then he was followed by Barry Allen in the 60s, whose sidekick was Wally West, Kid Flash, and then Barry Allen famously sacrificed himself during the story Crisis on Infinite Earths, and Wally took up the mantle and became the Flash himself. And this was a huge thing in comic books. I think it might have been the first time that a sidekick had kind of had taken the place of his mentor, which is, I think, always kind of maybe the idea of a lot of these guys that took on sidekicks is to train up the next generation, but we never actually saw that torch being passed, I don't think, until Wally West. And so when you have this story where Barry Allen is coming back, this is going to have a huge effect on Wally. You might think that he was going to get pushed out of the way and Barry Allen returns to the forefront. Well, that would happen years and years later, actually, with around the New 52 era. But at this time, that is not actually what happened. And so let's just kind of get into it. I'm going to be making comments as I browse through these issues using the DC Universe Infinite service. $8 a month, still, like, in my mind, a really great deal. I've really been enjoying myself with it. Now, the trade paperback version of this story starts with two relevant pages spliced in from issue 73 before this big story arc begins. Actually, there might be something from 72 as well. Anyway, there are these little moments that kind of foreshadow what's coming in this story in issues 74 through 79. But there are some little bits in issue 74 that kind of catch you up to what was going on in those prior issues. Basically, what you have happening is in the midst of these wild lightning strikes that are caused by this some kind of fight between Wally West and one of his forgettable villains. There's these wild lightning strikes going on caused by the climactic battle, and a figure seemingly made of electricity emerges and but vanishes into the shadows before Wally notices him. And then moments later, as Wally is debriefing with friends in his home, the most unexpected visitor arrives to wish them a Merry Christmas. It's Barry Allen, back from the dead, no worse for wear. And the creative team at the bottom of that issue tells a bold-faced lie in the final narration box of the issue. This was a December issue. I think they wanted to give readers kind of a Christmas gift. They say, sometimes you do get what you wish for. Barry Allen is back, and believe us, from this moment on, Wally's life will never be the same. Join us next issue for the whys, the hows, and what happens next in the lives of all the Flashes. Until then, happy holidays from Mark, Greg, Roy, Tim, Matt, Ruben, Brian, and all of us at DC Comics. Now, they told the truth in the sense that Wally's life would never be the same again, but was Barry Allen back? Yeah. Not really. So then we get in issue 74 a return to, we're into the actual story, and Wally's just kind of reflecting on the death of of Barry Allen and how it happened in Crisis on Infinite Earths. There's some nice art that's kind of recapturing, reinterpreting the moment where he found the Flash's costume, which was all that was left of him after he had run so fast that basically he completely turned into energy and joined an energy field that would later be identified as the Speed Force. So now Barry's catching up with Jay Garrick and Hal Jordan, old allies of his, a mentor in one case, and he's talking about how he doesn't really know exactly what happened. His memory's a little bit kind of wonky, but then as he emerged and was stumbling through the streets, he saw the Flash Museum, and that triggered his memory, reminding him of who he really was. Problem is, some of his amnesia still remains. It's a little bit suspect. He seems to remember some extraordinary details. He remembers that Barry was on trial for manslaughter, and as the issue progresses, we see more and more that he remembers. It's like, gosh, if he's not Barry, how could he know all this, right? And then Hal Jordan, Green Lantern, pulls Wally aside and says, well, listen, I mean, the ring says that he's telling the truth, and so do I. Well, I don't know that the latter means all that much to me, but the fact that the ring says that he's telling... I mean, this is the Green Lantern ring, so it's like, okay, he's telling the truth. What are we supposed to think, right? Well, that's exactly it. That's exactly what we're supposed to think, that that he is Barry Allen, because the Green Lantern ring says that he is telling the truth. But, as George Costanza would tell you, it's not a lie if you believe it. But still, the writers are trying to convince us. I mean, there's a slightly meta moment where Hal says, listen, I get it, Wally. Superheroes, we live in this world of shapeshifters and mind benders. It's like everything's possible in the comic book world. And so it's almost like he's saying here, don't worry, we've thought of that. Yeah, we know what you're thinking. We know it's crazy. But no, this is really legit. Okay, yeah, sure it is, And yet, Wally is still suspicious. And amidst that suspicion, he's having to deal with Barry getting caught up on current events, such as the fact that Pied Piper, one of Barry's old villains, has reformed since then, has become a trusted ally of the Flash. And then also there's the issue of Wally himself actually taking on the Flash mantle. I mean, Barry doesn't really know that he's done that until suddenly they realize they need to race into action. Barry jumps into his costume, and before he realizes it, although he was going to spring this on Barry a different way, Barry is looking at the person who has taken his place. And there is a bit of an awkward moment, and the awkwardness kind of continues as they go off to fight crime together, and they start seeing the dynamic of their old relationship starts kind of causing discomfort as they try to develop a new relationship. Barry is, as you would suspect from a guy who, for him, no time has passed, he's still kind of taking on the role of the mentor, still kind of, saying, how he would do things versus how Wally is doing things, while still recognizing that, Wally has gotten older. Wally has become his own man, and so he does express respect, even if he says, I would do things different, but you're your own man. So he acknowledges that he's missed out on quite a bit. And one thing that he's missed out on is the fact that Wally is not near as fast as he was when he was Kid Flash. He had equal speed, if I remember correctly, to Barry when he was Kid Flash, but shortly after taking the mantle of the Flash, he discovered that his powers were starting to have an adverse effect on him that, long story short, meant that he could only run at about the speed of sound now. And he certainly couldn't vibrate through solid objects by super speeding his molecules and crazy Flash stuff that Barry used to do. Now, I think that Wally had maybe broken the sound barrier by this point in the publishing history. I'm not sure, but nevertheless, he was still significantly slower than Barry was before Barry sacrificed himself. So they're out. They're basically just doing a crime of the week type investigation, and that's mostly just a vehicle for their personalities to play off of each other again, where Barry is kind of getting into a little bit of a lecturing mode. In fact, there's a vibe that I get from Barry in this story that I'm like, I'm feeling for Wally right now. Barry is certainly the classic straight and narrow kind of hero and is treating Wally like a kid. even kind of lecturing him a little bit. I mean, they're kind of playing up the fact that that Barry is, well, I guess the 60s. I was going to say he's a 1950s superhero. I guess 1960s isn't that when he came about? I can't remember exactly. Maybe it was the 50s. I don't remember now. But I want to say it was the early 60s. Anyway, he's this really old school kind of straight and narrow kind of hero, whereas Wally has more modern personality, quirks, and sensibilities in his writing style and in, who the writers make him to be. So they take care of the bad guy, and then Barry suddenly realizes that he's like, I have to go, and mysteriously takes off. And so Wally's like, what's up with that? One more reason to be suspicious, right? Turns out Barry is going back to the grave of his wife, who died before, well, it's really complicated. She died in the present day, back before Barry sacrificed himself, but then there's this whole convoluted thing about how she actually went forward into the future, like her spirit went forward into the future or something, and so that's where he went, and so they were able to have a little bit of sweet time together. But then it was while he was living in the future that this big time crisis was happening, that he left that future world to go and sacrifice himself for. And so coming back here, reviving, not in the future where he left Iris, but here in the present day, Iris is dead, and so he's kind of mourning the loss and just kind of talking by himself at her graveside about things that really only Barry would know, and expressing just remorse and grief at having not been able to have her with him, even though he's been brought back from the dead. And Wally is watching basically from the shadows and eavesdropping on this whole conversation that Barry is conveniently having out loud. And this is what convinces Wally that that Barry is who he says he is. And so this issue really ends on kind of a high note, where Wally's confessing, yeah, I did think that there was something up. You weren't mentioning Aunt Iris at all, and it turns out it was just because of your grief and not really wanting to face the reality of this situation. But in fact, now that I see that you do really care about Aunt Iris, you know all this stuff, that Aunt Iris, I should say, because Barry is his uncle by marriage through Aunt Iris, who is his aunt by blood. But anyway. So he believes now, and they're ready to kind of just figure out what this life is and go on together. And it's kind of this happy high note ending of this first issue. It even says the end with an exclamation point, as if to communicate, okay, Barry's back. This is the new status quo. And then we continue on with the story in the next issue. So then we're into issue 75. Barry Allen is back, it says. Baloney. And nothing will ever be the same again. So this issue is mostly about the status quo and how now there are 3 Flashes. There's Jay, Wally, and Barry, and they're all kind of working together as a team and fighting crime together, and isn't it great? Wally is more than content to return to idolizing Barry, as he always did, both before he became Kid Flash and then as he was being mentored by Barry as his sidekick. He always just had a great sense of hero worship for Barry, and he's just resuming that again, just loving and adoring Barry and admiring all that he is. And he also starts noticing that other people are really adoring Barry as well. A little kid comes up to get an autograph. Wally thinks for a second that he's asking for his autograph, but then he realizes, oh no, he's going to Barry. Barry is the Flash, and everybody's crazy about the old Flash being back again. At one point, Wally's even thinking, does the city need 3 Flashes? And so he talks to Linda, which they're not married at this point. I don't think they're engaged either, but they're just living together, a committed girlfriend-boyfriend relationship, long-term, and he's basically asking her, well, what would you think about moving to Midway City? And so he's really starting to have this mentality of stepping aside and letting Barry really take center stage again. Then there's an important little scene that foreshadows just a little bit of something. Wally comes across Barry. He's looking for him later on, and Barry is in his civilian clothes walking through the alley that he arrived in, that he materialized in. And he's like, "What are you doing here?" And he's just trying to put the pieces together, trying to figure things out. He doesn't have all of his memories back, and he was hoping that maybe something here in this alley where he emerged would give him some clue. He just got this sense that maybe there'd be something here that could provide a clue. And we don't really get an answer to that, but as they're walking away, as Wally and Jay are walking away from the alley with Barry, we see this shot of something in the rubble, in the dirt, and the garbage on the ground amidst the litter, and we can just make out the word Allen that looks like it's on the spine of a tarnished book of some kind. And so that immediately gets our attention, like, what in the world is that? But that thread is not followed for long. The Combine shows up. Some, I don't know, gang, high-tech gang of the week. I don't know what their deal is. They show up, wreaking havoc. All the Flashes are busy, trying to take them down. They are at least formidable enough that they cause a bunch of destruction and rubble and that, endanger some people, and Wally just barely pushes them out of the way, but he himself gets buried by all of the rubble. And one of the members of the Combine gang says, "Did you see that? This cannon was good for only one shot, but we made it count. I hope you're all paying attention to that epic moment. Let it be known that on this night, the Combine goes down in history. Let it be known that this night we killed the Flash." And you see like his hand sticking out from the rubble, and it appears that Wally, we know Wally's not dead, but it's this moment of triumph. Then we flash over to Barry, and he is furious. He says, "You did what?" Boom! He races over to the bad guy. Wally, meanwhile, is emerging from the rubble, still alive, and he can't hear what's going on, trying to figure out, and he just sees Barry just going to town on this guy, railing at him, and he just assumes that, like, Barry doesn't realize that he's alive, that he wasn't, he thought that Wally was killed and was probably vowing revenge and all this kind of stuff. Wally sees Barry raging, and he's thinking to himself, guess he honestly believes I'm dead. Look at him. He must be railing madly at the guy for killing me. Bellowing rage, swearing revenge. As I get closer, though, his exact words start to filter through all the white noise. Something else is going on here. He realizes what Barry was actually saying, and he's stunned. And then Barry actually notices Wally, and the two just look at each other. Barry has this grim, angry, furrowed look on his face. Wally, bloodied and his costume in tatters, is just stunned. We don't know what was said, but we cut away. He's back at home with Linda. Wally's in his civilian garb, totally depressed. She's trying to assure him, "Oh, Barry loves you. Barry cares about you." And in the narration boxes, Wally's saying to himself, "I want that to be the truth, but no matter how often I replay the moment, it won't come out that way." Half deaf, I run to Barry. His screams knife through the silence, and what I really hear horrifies me. And then we see Barry screaming in this flashback as it's just haunting Wally now. "I'm the Flash. Do you understand me, punk? I'm the Flash." And that's the end of the issue. It's like, whoa, what the crap? Into issue 76 now, and this issue really confronts, or Wally has to confront, his idolization of Barry, and really I think how misplaced it was. So he's just kind of trying to figure out how to move forward for now. He wants to connect with Jay, the original Flash, to kind of compare notes with him to see if he's noticed anything funny, but Jay seems to be kind of off the radar. We don't know what's going on. We find Jay meeting up with his old friend Johnny Quick, another speedster from back in the day, and he says basically that I need your help, and Johnny Quick is like, "It's what you were afraid of, isn't it? It's happening." And Jay says, "I think so, yeah, and I want to be ready." So there's no indication of what's going on right now, except that they're getting ready for something. Part of that getting ready involves looking up another old speedster comrade of theirs named Max Mercury, who has retired, but they have to convince him basically to come out of retirement. They both seem to think that he's going to be really key to whatever problem, to solving whatever problem they're about to face. Meanwhile, speaking of problems, Barry and Wally, still working together despite kind of like the really, really awkward moment that they had, are in the clutches of a supervillain's shrinking force field. And Wally can't vibrate through solid matter, and so they're having to kind of figure out how to get through this force field, which is like basically adapting to the vibrational patterns that Barry would normally use to get out. So Wally comes up with the idea of Barry giving him kind of a jump start, because Barry isn't fast enough to do the vibrate through matter trick. But if Wally's not fast enough to do that, but if Barry could like start taking his hand and getting it to vibrate really fast and kind of get him going, then Wally could be doing one vibrational pattern, and then Barry could do a different vibrational pattern. It's all a bunch of like sci-fi malarkey. But anyway, Barry manages to get out, but now Wally is still in the force field and is like, okay, it looks good. Okay, now just help me through, because the force field's still shrinking. Wally's still in the bubble, and Barry hesitates. And Wally's like pleading with him, come on, man. He's like, listen, I know you got a lot going on in your head these days, but you got to help me out here. And ultimately, Barry refuses. He's like, I'm on to you. You took up the mantle. You're just trying to get everybody to forget me. Trying to replace me, get everybody to forget me. I mean, Barry is starting to act like out and out psychotic. And he's now resolved that, like, okay, I'll tell you what's going to happen now is I'm just going to take it out on this city that's so ungrateful for me. If they're so willing and ready to forget me and my value and accept you as the Flash, forget that. This city is about to be destroyed. And Wally is totally broken. I mean, he's like, what are you doing? I didn't want to take your place. Everything I am, everything I do, I did it to honor you. And this really says something huge about Wally's motives. Up to this point, he has really been the Flash, seemingly entirely out of a desire to honor Barry Allen. Barry hears that profession, and there's a brief moment where it looks like he's going to be tender and accepting, but then he gets a nasty look on his face, says, "You're a mistake." And then he's like, "Don't feel bad though. You won't live to regret it." So he leaves him to die. So then there's this really, I think, key moment, not just in this issue, but a key moment in in Wally's life as the Flash. He has to face the fact that that Barry really did just totally reject him, and he's got to figure out how to get out of this alive, or he's going to die. And so he's like, okay, just clear your head for a second here. You got to forget what just happened with Barry. You got to forget the fact that you're totally freaking out, and you just got to focus on this vibration, keeping the vibration going and extending it to the rest of your body. Because if you don't do this right, then you're going to solidify inside this closing force field wall, and you're going to be instantly killed. So you've got to keep this vibration going. So it's really like this summoning up all of his inner strength kind of hero moment, so that he can do something he's never done before, maintain this kind of a vibration to move through matter and get himself out of this force field, which he ultimately, after extreme effort, finally does. But then he's collapsed in exhaustion and broken emotionally, because now he's thinking, well, now everything I do, what do I do it? Well, who do I do it for now? And this is, I think, an opportunity for us as believers to reflect. Who is driving me? Who is motivating my life? Am I looking for my greatest sense of fulfillment and affirmation in another person, in my spouse, or in my kids, or in the people that I respect, that I want affirmation from, or maybe just the faceless people that can give us clicks? What is really driving me to do all the things that I do? I think we know what the right answer is, but I think it's also worth facing, okay, well, what really is driving me? Who really am I trying to please? So Barry, thinking that Wally must have died, goes and, with a heavy heart, delivers the news to the media that Wally West, the Flash, because his identity is public, is dead. And Wally sees this broadcast from home and is just completely broken. I mean, not only is he being utterly rejected by the person he most admires, but he's also discovering that the person he most admires is deeply, deeply corrupt, deeply, deeply flawed. And that's the note that the issue ends on. And I think that it's a distinct issue, but it's still an important one to think about. Okay, who do I admire, and do I see them through rose-colored lenses? I mean, it's doubtful that the people that we admire are going to turn out to be completely radically different from what we've known them to be all of our lives, but that does happen. But even so, I think a much more common experience is that we just start to see flaws. Not that the people we admire are actually these horrible people in secret, but we just start seeing their flaws. They disappoint us, they hurt us, and we have to figure out how we are going to deal with that. So then we come to issue 77. Barry is now on a rampage and is just taking all of this crazy anger he's got going on out on all of Central City, and he's being considered a villain now. And meanwhile, Wally West is just kind of off the radar, hasn't told anybody yet that he's still alive, and is just kind of like still shattered by what happened. He makes an interesting remark. He says, "Funny, a bunch of times I've been stripped of my powers, but in my mind I was still the Flash. I wouldn't ever let that go. This time my powers are intact. It's my identity that's been revoked, and that makes all the difference." We've got a lot of issues of identity going around today, where people are finding their identity in all kinds of things, in all kinds of the wrong things, and the pursuit of identity in those things leads them to places of great dissatisfaction, great frustration. And here we have Wally West having based his identity entirely on pleasing Barry and living up to his legacy. And when Barry apparently turns out to be not only flawed, but actually a villain, then his whole identity is shattered. This is why it's so important for us to first base our identity in something that is true, and then also base our identity in something that is consistent and worth placing our identity and finding our identity in the love of God for us, and as believers in his adopted children. These are things that don't change because God doesn't change. They don't stand or fall on whether or not we get validation from others as we present that as our identity. Whether people validate that or not, it's still the truth. So I think this moment is a great opportunity for us as readers to ask ourselves, okay, where is my sense of self, my sense of identity, my sense of purpose, my sense of who I am? What am I basing that in? So Barry continues on his rampage, and meanwhile, Jay Garrick, Johnny Quick, and Max Mercury have now gotten into their costumes and caught up with him, and they are going to put a stop to him. And this puts Barry in a confrontation. With all three of them, really, they're doing some nice teamwork. But then there's a one-on-one bit where he's going up against Max Mercury. And this is a character that existed with the name Quicksilver back in the early 40s. But in order to avoid confusion with Marvel's speedster Quicksilver, when Mark Waid reintroduced him as part of DC continuity in this story, this is the first time he'd been seen since the early 40s. He gives him a new name, still refers to how he had gone by the name Quicksilver at one point, but it reestablishes his origin as apparently some kind of a speed guru. There's indications that he was a mentor of some kind to Johnny Quick, maybe Jay Garrick as well. And Max Mercury would continue to be used in this kind of role in Wally West's life after this story, going forward as they begin to understand more about where their speed comes from and how it works and what can be done with it. He's not near as fast as Barry Allen here, or I think even as fast as Wally, but he has all this experience using speed and putting it to use in interesting ways, and overcoming his own limitations and using agility instead of speed itself. And so he's an interesting character that will play a valuable role in Wally West's life going forward. Meanwhile, as the old-timer speedsters are keeping Barry busy, Wally is just wandering in civilian clothes. He wanders back to the alley that Barry emerged from, hoping to find some kind of clue to understand what happened to Barry. Why has he become what he has become? And it's walking through this alley that he overhears someone digging through the trash and reading aloud what they found, and mentioning the name Iris. This person had come across this book that we saw earlier that had the last name Allen written on the binder, and so he pays the guy $20 and he gets his hands on it and is shocked by what he finds inside. We aren't told the specifics at this point. He just says, in the inside front cover, what's left of it, I find something written, 2 words that turn my world around. We jump back and see that Jay Garrick, the last of the old-timer speedsters, still standing, suffers a spectacular defeat in a big explosion, and Wally arrives too late, but determined now, based on what he has found, to take on Barry and put an end to all of this. Issue 78 opens with Wally sitting down and talking with Johnny Quick, kind of like doing some prep before maybe they enact some plan. And this is such an interesting little moment here. Johnny Quick is trying to teach him the speed formula that he used to move at super speed. This is where, like, Flash starts becoming an interesting comic to me, because it's clearly more than just about a guy who can run fast. That there's these sci-fi concepts that are used in conjunction with the concept of super speed, and they can explore all kinds of interesting ideas. Johnny Quick explains to him, he says, it's a mathematical formula, this 3x2 times 9yz times 4a. It describes a fourth-dimensional construct. It can't be realized in three-dimensional geometry, but if you can envision it mentally, using the spoken formula as a focus, your brain taps into the fourth dimension, time, and draws speed energy from there. Now, for all I know, Wally is way better at math than I am, most people are, but he can't quite hold the image of this construct in his head, and so he can't tap into that. But this is the first kind of hint that this could be a potential thing that Wally could do, where he could add the super speed given to Johnny Quick by focusing on this formula, this extra dimensional concept, and that could be added to his own speed. And we'll come back to that, not in this story, but we'll come back to it issues from now, as kind of like an isolated story that leads into another big story arc for Wally that really explores new levels of super speed for him. But even right now, this is an important moment, an important concept in the evolution of Wally and his powers specifically. Meanwhile, Max Mercury is trying to get Wally to see the bigger picture. He's apparently some kind of Yoda or guru of speed, and explains that Johnny's formula works for him, but it's not really necessary. And this is where Mark Waid's apparent interest in Eastern philosophy really starts making its way into Flash comics in a noticeable way. Max says the true magic, however, of super speed lies in finding the zen of speed. And this definitely isn't the last time that we're going to see Eastern philosophy start to shape some of the concepts and ideas that are presented in The Flash, specifically in what would become known as the Speed Force, which is a lot like what it sounds like. It's very much like the Force in Star Wars. It's this omnipresent field of energy that our hero is able to tap into. Max's main point is that Wally shouldn't be thinking about his speed, that he should just let it flow out of him. And Mark Waid, in a bit of a meta moment, I think appropriately has Wally kind of mock Max a little bit and calls him Yoda, saying, well, that's not the most revolutionary theory I've heard. I mean, so there's an acknowledgement, I think, that yes, we're basically ripping off Star Wars and the Force, with where we're going with Max and with super speed in this comic. But then from a character standpoint, Max says something interesting. He says, do you ever wonder why you're not as fast as Barry? And Wally says, well, biochemical stuff, blah, 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 stuff that had been explained as the reason for his reduction in speed in the comics before. But then Max says, well, how many of those ideas for why you can't move as fast as him, how many of them have to do with fear? Wally really doesn't like this idea. He says, no one can tell me that I'm afraid of speed. I love what I can do. But Max points out, but you love your Uncle Barry even more. And if you ever get to the point where you're as fast as him, then you will really have replaced him, despite the fact that you've been motivated up to this point by a desire to carry on his legacy and not really kind of replace him, but just be a memorial to him. So again, we're seeing this moment where Wally is having to step out of Barry's shadow, really. That's a lot of what this story is about. And Jay Garrick, the original Flash, at one point in the story gives him an affirmation, an expression of confidence, and calls him Flash, to which Wally replies, well, thanks, Jay. Wait a minute, Flash? Whatever happened to Junior? And Jay says, I call people by their names. As far as I'm concerned, you've earned yours. And so he's really saying now, you're not Junior anymore, you are the Flash. So without telling the reader at this point what he discovered in that ruined book, he does tell these old-time speedsters, and they all start putting a plan into motion that's a secret to us. Wally goes back to the Flash Museum, which was just nearly destroyed by a battle between Green Lantern and Barry Allen that took place in an issue of Green Lantern. And going through there, he has this moment where he's like doubting himself, but determined to go on and take on this, unbeatable battle seemingly. And he says to himself that, he's not going to be a coward because he says, I was taught better than that. And then they show us a statue of Barry and Wally together, with Barry kind of as a smiling mentor, has his hand on Wally's shoulder. And so we see here that he still has this affection and admiration for Barry. And so as readers, we should be saying to ourselves, well, that's weird. Why is he reflecting on this? Maybe he's just remembering Barry as he was, or what's going on? In the rubble of the Flash Museum, he finds finally what he's looking for, and it's a Flash ring, which longtime Flash fans will know was what Barry Allen used to put his super compressed costume into, so he could have his costume with him at any time, and he could pop it out, and then once it's exposed to air, it expands, and he's able to put it on. Kind of a neat concept, a very classic Flash concept. And so we're like, well, what's this all about? Why does he need a Flash ring? The Flash already has a costume. Or Barry, already has a costume. What's going on? Then we see a clue. He says, they say clothes make the man. Let's hope that's true. And the last shot we see of Wally in the Flash Museum, he's speeding off to the section of the museum dedicated to the Rogues Gallery. Then we cut away, we see that the older speedsters are kind of keeping Barry busy, and there's an interesting remark here when Barry says when he's fighting Jay Garrick, he says, you blinked, old man, your mistake. You may have the edge in speed, but what counts now is endurance. And I've read an offhanded comment like this before when Wally has said, after this story, that Jay is faster than him, and that's always really kind of surprised me. They've never made a bigger deal out of this, that in like short bursts, Jay is actually the fastest of the Flashes in this era, but he has very little endurance comparatively. And yet I've only seen that in all the Flash stories I've read that have to, or the Jay Garrick stories, I've only seen that mentioned in offhanded comments, and I would think that would be something they would really want to play up in a story at some point. Maybe they did, and I just don't remember. Anyway, So although he's able to deal with the old-timers, Barry's costume does get ripped up in the process, and so he goes back to and which is, we can, I think, see in retrospect as part of the plan. That was intentional on the part of the old-timers. He goes back to the Flash Museum because he's so caught up in being the one true Flash. Well, then he's got to have a proper costume, you know? And so he goes back to the Flash Museum. He's looking through the rubble to find a spare costume. Wally says, looking for this, shows up behind him, throws him the flash ring. He says, go ahead, suit up. And he pops out the costume. We can't see exactly what it is. It's shadowed, but Barry looks at it and he's like, what in the world is this? Wally says, looks familiar, doesn't it? And you can just see in one shot that he's holding a costume that's not red, but is yellow. And that's a huge clue. But only if you're a really old-school fan of The Flash. Otherwise, you might think, yellow, that's what Kid Flash wears, right? Well, what is this? But a change comes over Barry. He, at first, seems, confused, but then there's a moment of realization where he says, yes, this does look familiar, and he gets a really creepy, evil grin on his face. So Wally kind of it's almost kind of like a villain's expositional blabbing at the end, but it's coming out of the mouth of the hero this time. He says, congratulations, you had the whole world going. Well, this is like Sherlock Holmes, at the end of a mystery where he's going off and explaining everything. Congratulations, you had the whole world going, he says. Somehow, you even fooled yourself. That was the crowning touch. I genuinely believe your tale of traumatic amnesia. You had to have been confused when you materialized in that alleyway, otherwise you would never have left this behind. And he holds up The Life Story of the Flash. That's the title of the ruined book that he found in the alley. That's right, he says, a full biography of Barry Allen the Flash, his entire life in intimate detail from birth to death. It couldn't have been published, he says, in our time. Barry's identity isn't public knowledge, at least not in the 20th century when this story took place. No, this book came from the future, he says. It came with you. You're not Barry Allen. Your name is Eobard Thawne. What a crazy great name. Or, as you're known in this century, dun dun dun, Professor Zoom, the Reverse Flash. And so that issue ends on a big cliffhanger. So now we're in issue 79, the last issue of this story, and hardcore Flash fans might be thinking, well, wait a minute, how could this be the Reverse Flash? And Wally himself says the same thing. He's like, you're dead. Uncle Barry killed you. He snapped your neck in order to save an innocent woman's life. And what we learn is that this actually isn't the Reverse Flash Professor Zoom from after that point in his timeline. It's actually him from before he ever became the Reverse Flash. Turns out in the 25th century where he comes from, he's like this hardcore fan of the Flash. He just worships him and has this whole mental canon in his head about being friends with him and grieving his loss, even hundreds of years removed from Barry Allen. He was obsessed. He collected paraphernalia, including the biography that was written about him that had all the details of his life, which is why he could know all these private things about Barry. He had some kind of futuristic plastic surgery performed on him to make him look like Barry because he just wanted to be Barry. In collecting all kinds of Flash paraphernalia, he got the ultimate collectible, which was the cosmic treadmill, which, powered by the Flash's super speed, allows him and other speedsters to travel through time. And so once he had that, he was like, oh my gosh, I can go back in time, I can meet my hero, but first I have to have the Flash's super speed. And so he just spent all of his considerable fortune and years and put his body through the ringer to eventually try to replicate the electrochemical bath that gave Barry Allen his super speed powers. He was eventually successful at that. He grabbed the biography to get it signed and got on the treadmill and shot through time. But because the treadmill was so old and decrepit by that point, the calibration was off. He emerged after Barry Allen had died and was so addled by the experience that his memory, his mind was all disoriented. He dropped the journal in the alley as he stumbles off trying to figure out what's going on, and he just felt totally shattered by the fact that he'd missed his chance to be with his idol. But then in this kind of psychotic state, he thought, well, there must be a reason. There must be a reason that I was brought here for a purpose. He goes to the Flash Museum, is just meditating on all this, and then he realizes that he's perfectly positioned to give Barry Allen's legacy a new lease on life, to take his place as the Flash. So he was determined to learn about what the Flash valued and the villains that he fought, and he would learn to fight those villains too. So he's going through the Flash Museum, just kind of doing all this research, and was stunned to discover in a display in the museum that the Flash's worst, most hated, most evil enemy, Professor Zoom, was him. It was destined to be him. He has this complete psychotic break and is just, he doesn't want to be killed at the hands of his hero, and he's in this totally insane state. He thinks to himself, well, Barry will never kill me if I become Barry Allen. If Eobard Thawne disappears and only Barry Allen remains. And so as he's looking in the reflective glass of the Flash Museum displays, all he's seeing is Barry Allen's face because of how he changed his own face. And all of this stuff combined just puts him in this state of psychosis where he believes he is Barry Allen. And that's how he was able to fool Green Lantern's ring and everybody else. He really did believe that he was Barry Allen. Then there's some more fighting as Flash's friends come along. Reverse Flash escapes, and later they discover that he is on the news. He's about to kill Linda Park, Wally's girlfriend, and he's about to kill her in the same way that I believe he killed Iris Allen, like by vibrating his hand and shoving it into her skull and just instantly killing her. So it's kind of like his signature death move, and he's about to do it on Linda. So, of course, Wally races across town. He's instantly there, and he and Reverse Flash are going at it in the big final climactic battle, but Wally is clearly overmatched. And there's a pivotal moment when Wally's down. He says, for a long moment, I'm ready to throw in the towel, and then he goes and says something stupid. The Reverse Flash says, once you're out of my way, I really will make this city forget Barry Allen. From now on, when they remember the Flash, they'll remember me. So he takes off. Linda is helping Wally get up. He's still battered and virtually beaten. And he says to her, that thought you said you had that I might not be able to stop him on my own, which she had expressed a while ago. He says, put it out of your head. He's got this big look of determination, a big splash page where he kisses her. It's this heroic kind of romantic. I'm like, I don't know why he's doing this big, deep kiss at this moment. I guess it's just kind of the comic booky thing that you do. Put it out of your head, he says. And this is the turning point where he's like, Max was right. He says in the narration boxes, I am afraid. I'm afraid of replacing Barry. But what he realizes is that he is more afraid even of allowing the Reverse Flash to replace Barry Allen. So this is his, Neo can see the code of the Matrix moment long before that moment existed. And, he's just talking in his little mental boxes, saying, my speed has waxed and waned since Barry's death. I never thought that the electric power that sparked it could ever be recaptured. I was wrong. The power is within me. It always was. So that's a very common kind of a notion in these kinds of stories. The power is within you. What's that elephant's name? Dumbo. The power's in you, Dumbo. You don't need the feather. It's that classic philosophical idea of self-actualization. You just got to kind of believe in yourself. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And confidence in a rightly appraised version of yourself is appropriate, but to make that kind of the ultimate thing is a bit unfortunate in when we see that in fiction and when people adopt it as their life philosophy, because it kind of makes us the ultimate, and at some point we're going to realize, oh crap, I'm not the ultimate. I'm not as strong, I'm not as powerful, I'm not as in control of my life and my circumstances as I would like to think I am. But it's appealing in a power fantasy, and that's why I think comic books lean on it so much, is that it's appealing. We love the idea that if we just want something bad enough, we can have it. That if we want something badly enough, we are the ones that are in control, and we're not subject to anyone else. But at the very least, it makes for, a good climactic moment here. Now they're evenly matched, Wally and the Reverse Flash. Eobard Thawne starts getting cowardly really fast, and it makes sense because this is him before he's an experienced villain, before he's even an experienced super speed user. I mean, he's probably read about it a ton, and he probably had some experience with it in the 25th century before using the time machine. But it makes sense that he wouldn't be at the top of his game. Nevertheless, there is a moment where he gets the better of Wally. He's about to vibrate him to death. And Wally is just summoning all the strength he can just to stay conscious and is just saying, I just need like 1 second. And then, Krakow, as the text says, a bolt of lightning comes down, strikes the ground between them, and gives Wally the second that he needs. He whispers, thank you. It's not clear to who. Almost looks like he's looking at the reader, which is kind of weird. And then he takes the chance to get Reverse Flash off guard. So Thawne is now cowering and really just feeling defeated by Wally, and Wally is just kind of dominating over him and saying, I'm not going to kill you. I'm just totally going to destroy you. And he says he's going to do that with the cosmic treadmill, saying he's going to be a haunting figure in his life, starting when he was a young man, just terrorizing him. He gets on the treadmill, runs, vanishes. Thawne freaks out. He's like, no, of course, and runs after him on the treadmill to follow the same coordinates to wherever Wally went in time. But turns out to be a trick. Wally just made himself disappear by getting out of the way really quickly, faster than even Thawne could see him. He had pre-programmed the cosmic treadmill to send Thawne back to his own time. And just as the travel through time addled his mind on the way to present day, same thing happened on the way back. He basically forgot the entire experience that he had. So it's an interesting little kind of factoid that the first Flash that Thawne ever fought wasn't Barry, it was actually Wally. And so we have a final kind of happy note, and the narration text boxes really kind of tell us what the whole story was about. Wally says, it took me a long, long time, but I've finally come into my own. Then there's a couple little nuggets that really give hints of where the Flash as a comic book is going to be going in the future. He says, the ghost of Barry Allen that I've kept alive all these years is finally at rest. He no longer dominates my life, but he'll always watch over me. I can't explain it, but I'll know it so every time I see lightning crack the sky. Now, some of that is just kind of like the sentimental spirituality that a lot of people will tell ourselves. When we really don't know what's going on when our loved ones pass away, we don't know that they're looking at us. There's kind of some unusual things that people end up saying about loved ones who have passed away, I think, out of a desire to comfort themselves that are not necessarily based on truth. However, in this case, in this fictional universe, we can assume that he's right in some sense about this, because he's connecting Barry's presence watching over him to lightning. This seems to be just a little hint of his growing awareness of what again would become known as the Speed Force, which we eventually learn speedsters are able to go to as kind of their own heaven place that's, I guess, just for speedsters, which is really weird. If they go fast enough, they convert into energy and enter and become one with the Speed Force. So aside from the, somewhat eye-rolling adaptation of Eastern philosophy, it's a neat little kind of hint of the developing lore of the Speed Force that would be coming. The second little nugget that's a big part of Flash in the next several dozen issues, I think, is this biography that he comments on that we learn was actually written by Iris Allen, but not in the 25th century. Remember, this was a book that Thawne had as a collectible. It had been written long before Thawne was born. And when was it written? It was written in 1997. This story takes place in 1993. And so the life story of the Flash, published by Keystone Press, that's the city that he lives in 1997. So from Wally's perspective, Iris is dead. He doesn't know about the whole thing. Well, maybe he does. I can't remember if he knows that she went to the future. I mean, Flash readers know that happened. I don't know if Wally ever knew about that. But whatever the case may be, this is a strong suggestion to us that Iris somehow is going to end up traveling through time and coming back to the present day. And the presence of Iris Allen in the Flash comic book in the years going forward coming up really just added some neat things, because she was sort of a prophet from the future. She knew all these things about Wally's life and stuff. And so if some of the seeds that have been planted here interest you, I highly recommend following the Wally West era of the Flash, going forward from this story even. Or if you want to jump straight to the good stuff, look for the story Terminal Velocity, which is a great exploration, finally, of the Speed Force that would forever change Flash stories. So I'm pretty sure that's a story that I will be getting to at some point in the Essential Issues series. But that is all for now. Finally done. This went much longer than I thought. This is my first crack at doing this in kind of an unscripted way, and it went much longer than I thought. So let me know if you'd like me to trim things down, and I can see what I can do about it. I'm just having so much fun using the DC Universe Infinite app to kind of record this and make my way through it. So I don't know what this series will look like going forward, but I've had a great time. I hope you enjoyed this too. Thanks for listening or watching, and I don't know. I'll go read some more comics. The Christian Geek Central podcast is the longest-running podcast for Christian geeks, with over 600 weekly episodes and counting, featuring audio versions of much of the same content you'll find here, plus exclusive content including weekly news updates from the creators of Christian comics, novels, and video games, debriefing and commentary about what I've been playing, reading, and watching, and my expanded responses to your comments and questions via YouTube, email, or the Christian Geek Central forums. And now, with timestamps, so you can jump straight to the segments you want to hear most. Get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services, and enjoy one more way you can geek out and seek the truth.